always thought love from a parent was something you could count on. A constant. Like gravity. Until the day I learned that even gravity can fail you when someone else shines brighter in their eyes. My name is Adrian. I'm 29 years old. And this is the story of the day. My father chose my sister over me, and the man who showed me what family truly means. Growing up, I was the responsible one. That was the word everyone used for me. Not beautiful like my sister. Not gifted or special. Just responsible. It sounds like a compliment. But it's not. It's a sentence the kind that means you'll always be the one cleaning up after everyone else's mistakes. My sister, Brianna, was the opposite. She was chaos wrapped in charm, even as kids. She had a way of turning every rule into a suggestion and every failure into someone else's fault. And my father adored her for it. He'd say things like, "She's just passionate," or "You were born steady." "Adrian, your sister was born to fly." I wanted to ask him, and what was I born for? To hold the ladder while she climbs. But I never did. Because in our house, silence kept the peace. When I met Evan, my fiancé, I thought maybe I'd finally found balance. He was kind. Patient. The type of man who listened, really listened, even when I didn't have the words to explain why something hurt. He didn't care that my family barely noticed me. He saw me. After 3 years of dating, he proposed under the oak tree behind his grandmother's house. It was quiet. Simple. Perfect. When I called my parents, my mother squealed. My father said, "That's wonderful. Honey, we'll start planning right away." But then he added, almost as an afterthought, "Just make sure Brianna doesn't feel left out. You know how she gets." Even in my happiest moment, I was reminded of my role caretaker of someone else's emotions. From the very beginning, my wedding planning wasn't mine. My mother and father insisted on paying, which I thought was generous until I realized it meant every decision needed their approval. The venue, the colors, even the menu, nothing escaped their opinions. And Brianna, she turned every meeting into a stage. She'd arrive late, take center seat, and say things like, "Adrian, you should really go with a tighter dress. Evan's family is so sophisticated." Or, "Do you really want a small wedding? Don't you think that's a bit sad?" If she hadn't been my sister, I would have called her a stranger. Still, I tried to be graceful. I told myself she was just insecure. I told myself my father's attention didn't mean my worth was smaller. But every time he laughed at her jokes and ignored my ideas, the little girl inside me, the one who used to wait at the window for him to come home, started to cry again. The final straw came 2 weeks before the wedding. We were at a family dinner when Brianna announced she'd been invited to present her business proposal to a group of investors. I didn't even know she had a business. My father's face lit up. "That's incredible. Sweetheart, when's the presentation?" She smiled sweetly. "June 20th. My stomach dropped. "That's my wedding day." The table fell silent. She looked at me with feigned innocence. "Oh no, I didn't realize the dates overlapped. But Daddy, this is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity." My father immediately said, "We'll figure it out. Maybe Adrian can move the ceremony up a few hours." I couldn't breathe. "Dad, we've been planning this for months. People have flown in. We can't just..." "Sweetheart," he interrupted, his tone patronizing. "You only get married once. Your sister's trying to build her career." That's when it hit me. He wasn't choosing between a wedding and a presentation. He was choosing between me and her. For the next week, I didn't sleep. I replayed that dinner in my mind over and over, wondering how love could feel so one-sided for so long without me seeing it. Evan tried to reassure me. "Your father will come around," he said. "He just doesn't understand how much this hurts you." But deep down, I knew he wouldn't. Because my father didn't see me as someone to prioritize, just someone who could handle being disappointed. 2 days before the wedding, he called. "Adrian," he said. "Your mother and I decided we'll go with Brianna to her presentation. She needs our support." My hand went numb. "You're not coming to my wedding. We'll celebrate later," he said, like it was an afterthought. "We're family, you'll understand one day." I wanted to scream, to tell him he'd chosen wrong for the last time. But all I said was, "Goodbye, Dad." When I hung up, I cried so hard I couldn't recognize my own reflection. The morning of the wedding, I woke up to sunlight spilling across my bed. My dress hung on the closet door, glowing softly in the light. I sat there for a long time, just staring at it. The day I'd dreamed of my entire life was finally here, and the two people who were supposed to love me unconditionally wouldn't be there to see it. My maid of honor, Chloe, tried to distract me, talking about the flowers, the music, the guests arriving, but nothing filled the emptiness in my chest, until I heard a knock on the door. When I opened it, Jack, Evan's uncle, was standing there. He was in his 60s, tall, kind-eyed, the sort of man who carried both strength and softness in the same breath. "Morning, kiddo," he said gently. "Evan told me what happened." I nodded, trying not to cry again. "It's fine. I'm used to it." He shook his head. "You shouldn't have to be." He hesitated, then held out his arm. "May I have the honor?" I frowned. "Of what?" "Walking you down the aisle." My throat closed. For a moment, I couldn't speak. Then the tears came, the kind that burn because they come from every year you spent pretending not to need anyone. I managed a whisper. "Yes." The ceremony was everything I'd dreamed of, and everything I hadn't. As I stood at the end of the aisle, the music swelling, Jack beside me, I felt both the weight of absence and the beauty of presence. Every step toward Evan was a step away from the little girl who kept waiting for her father to show up. When I reached the altar, I looked at Evan and smiled, not because everything was perfect, but because I finally realized I didn't need perfection to feel whole. As we exchanged vows, a breeze swept through the open chapel. For a moment, I could almost feel my grandmother's spirit there, whispering, "You're loved, my girl," even when they forget to say it. But the real story didn't end at "I do." It began that night at the reception, when a truth I never expected came crashing into my carefully rebuilt peace. Because what Brianna had told my father wasn't true. And by the time the night was over, the man who broke my heart would be the one begging for forgiveness. The reception was held under a canopy of lights that shimmered like stars over a quiet vineyard. Laughter echoed through the night. Clinking glasses. Soft music. Everything was beautiful. But inside, I still felt the hollowness of knowing 2 empty seats bore my last name. Every guest seemed to notice. Some avoided mentioning it, others whispered, "She's the bride whose father didn't come." I smiled for photos, greeted relatives, and danced when the band started playing. But the truth was I felt like a performer at my own life. Until halfway through dinner, when my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. It read, "You deserve to know. Your sister lied." My heart stopped. For a moment, I couldn't move. Another message followed. There was no presentation. She made it up to get your father's attention. I looked around the reception, my vision blurring. Chloe caught my expression and hurried over. "What's wrong?" she whispered. I handed her the phone. Her eyes widened as she read the message. "Who sent this?" "I don't know," I said. My voice trembled. "But if it's true?" She gripped my hand. "Then the truth will find its way out. It always does." Later that night, after the music quieted and the guests began to leave, I sat alone under the string lights, staring at the phone screen. I wanted to ignore it to protect what little peace I had left, but deep down, I already knew. It made too much sense. Brianna's sudden big opportunity. her dramatic timing, my father's blind loyalty. It wasn't about investors or ambition. It was about control. She couldn't stand a day where I was the center of attention. And my father, as always, chose to follow her light, even if it meant dimming mine. The next morning, Evan and I were packing for our honeymoon when there was a knock at the door. It was Jack again, still in his wedding suit. He loosened, his expression serious. "Adrian," he said quietly, "you should sit down." Evan looked up. "What's going on?" Jack hesitated. "Your father called me early this morning." My stomach turned. "Why?" He sighed. "He went to that presentation yesterday with your mother and Brianna. It wasn't what she said it was." I froze. "What do you mean?" "She rented out a small conference room at a hotel. No investors. No audience. Just a slideshow of fake projections. When your father realized, he confronted her. She broke down and admitted she made it all up." The room fell silent. Jack's eyes softened. His devastated. "Adrian." He said he's never seen her cry like that. But he also said the moment she confessed, he realized what he'd done to you. I couldn't breathe. What did he say exactly? Jack's voice cracked. He said, "I abandoned my daughter on her wedding day because I couldn't see past my own guilt for failing her sister." For a long moment, I said nothing. I just sat there, staring at the wall, the sound of my heartbeat thudding in my ears. Evan knelt beside me, his hand on mine. "Hey, you don't owe him anything." "I know," I whispered, "but I need to hear it from him." Jack nodded. "He wants to see you." "He's outside." My heart clenched. "Outside. He's been waiting in the car for over an hour," Jack said softly. "He didn't want to come in uninvited." Evan looked at me carefully. "You don't have to go." But I already knew I would. When I stepped outside, my father was sitting in the passenger seat, hands clasped, head bowed. He looked older, smaller somehow. The man who once commanded every room now seemed like a shadow of himself. He looked up when he saw me, eyes red. "Adrian." I didn't move. "Why are you here?" He opened his mouth, then closed it again. Struggling, because I made the biggest mistake of my life. I stood there, my arms crossed, my voice steady. "You've made a lot of those. You'll have to be more specific." He winced. "I deserve that." "Do you?" I said softly. "Do you even know what you deserve?" "Dad, because I know what I deserve to have you there. To hear you say you were proud of me. To see you in the front row when I took the biggest step of my life." He swallowed hard. "I know, and I can't change that." "Then why come now?" I whispered. "To ease your conscience." He shook his head. "No, to finally face it." He reached into his pocket and pulled out something small, a folded piece of paper. "I found this when I was cleaning Brianna's room after the argument," he said. "It's the original email from the hotel, the one confirming the fake presentation. She wrote my name in the guest list." I stared at it, my hands trembling. "Why would she do that?" He exhaled shakily. "Because she thought if I went with her, I'd finally forgive myself for everything I'd done wrong as a father. But all she did was prove how much I've failed both of you." His voice broke. "Adrian, I don't expect forgiveness. I just need you to know, I see it now, all of it. Every birthday I missed. Every time I looked past you. I thought I was being fair, giving both of you what you needed. But I was really just feeding my own guilt. I didn't know what to say. The silence between us was so heavy it felt alive. Then, softly, I said, "You didn't just miss a wedding. Dad, you missed a daughter." Tears filled his eyes. "I know." For a moment, we just stood there, a lifetime of hurt suspended in the air between us. Then I turned away. "I don't know if I can forgive you." He nodded slowly. "Then let me earn it. However long it takes." Over the next few weeks, he tried. He called often, not to ask for forgiveness, but to listen. He showed up quietly at the foundation I volunteered for, donating under a fake name. And one afternoon, he visited again, not alone this time. Brianna was with him. She looked different, too tired. Pâle, but humbled. "I wanted to apologize," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Not because I got caught, because I finally realized what I've become." I stared at her, unsure what to feel. Anger, pity, relief. Maybe all three. "You broke something I can't fix," I said quietly. "I know," she said, tears spilling down. "But I'm not asking you to fix it. I'm asking you to let me try to build something new." My father added softly, "We're starting therapy together. I'm not giving up on either of you this time." Something in his tone, raw, stripped of pride, made me believe him. That night, Evan and I walked by the lake near our home. The moonlight shimmered across the surface, gentle and forgiving. "Do you think people can really change?" I asked. Evan squeezed my hand. "I think people can try, and sometimes that's enough." I nodded. "Then maybe I'll try too." He smiled. "Not for them, for you." And that was the moment I realized forgiveness isn't a gift you give others. It's a release you give yourself. It doesn't mean the pain disappears. It just stops owning you. Weeks later, I received another text. This time, it wasn't anonymous. It was from Brianna. "Dad's been writing a letter to you. He says he doesn't want to send it until he's earned the right. I thought you should know." For the first time in months, I smiled. Because maybe, just maybe, some things don't end. They just begin again in a quieter way. A few weeks later, I found myself sitting alone in my living room with a stack of unopened letters. Each one was from my father. He had been sending them every few days. Even though I hadn't answered a single one, Evan would bring them in, place them quietly on the table, and say nothing. He knew I wasn't ready. But that night, something inside me shifted. Maybe it was exhaustion. Maybe it was curiosity. Maybe it was the small, fragile hope that the man who had raised me still had something left worth believing in. I tore one envelope open. Inside was a handwritten note, shaky, uneven, full of crossouts. "Adrian." Every night, I replay that morning in my mind, the one where I told you I wouldn't come. I can still hear the silence on the other end of the phone. It was the sound of my failure. I spent my whole life thinking love meant fixing things, protecting your sister, managing everyone's storms. I never noticed that you were weathering one of your own. "I'm sorry." The words blurred as I read them, tears falling faster than I could wipe them away. At the bottom, in small, fading ink, he had written, "If you ever let me back into your life, I promise I'll be the one walking beside you, not ahead, not behind." The next morning, I drove to my parents' old house. It was almost empty now, boxes stacked in corners, the faint smell of cedar and old perfume. My mother answered the door, surprised. "Adrian," she breathed. "I didn't think. I'm not here to talk about him." I interrupted gently. "I just came to say goodbye to this place." She looked at me for a long moment, then nodded, stepping aside. "Then let's say it together." We walked through the halls, the floors creaking beneath our feet. Every corner carried ghosts' laughter, arguments, birthdays, the soft clinking of dinner plates where silence had always spoken louder than words. When we reached the living room, my mother stopped. "You know," she said quietly, "your father always said you were his steady one. He never realized that steady doesn't mean unbreakable." Her voice trembled. I should have told him sooner. I turned to her. "You both should have." She nodded, tears glistening. "And now, I'm learning to live without waiting for an apology," I said softly. That seemed to hit her harder than any accusation. She reached out, touched my hand, and whispered, "I hope someday you'll forgive me too." I didn't answer. I just held her hand, and that was enough. That evening, when I got home, another envelope was waiting. This one smaller, older, sealed differently from the rest. Inside was a photograph of me as a child sitting on my father's shoulders, laughing. On the back, he had written, "The last time I knew what unconditional love looked like." Something inside me cracked open, because the truth was I still loved him. Even after everything. Even after every missed moment and every cruel choice. That's what made it so painful. You don't grieve hate. You grieve love that was misplaced. Months passed. I threw myself into work. Into my marriage. Into the quiet routines that made life predictable again. But healing has a way of sneaking up on you slow. Stubborn. Demanding to be felt. One afternoon, while organizing donations for the community center, I saw Brianna's name on a volunteer form. I froze. She arrived an hour later. No makeup. Her hair tied back. Sleeves rolled up. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Then she smiled faintly. "You look happy." "I'm getting there," I said. We sorted boxes side by side for a while. The silence heavy but not hostile. "Finally," she said. "I didn't come here to make peace. I came here because I need to learn how to live differently. You've done that. I haven't." I looked at her, surprised by the honesty in her tone. "It's not easy," I said. "Forgiving yourself never is." She nodded. "But maybe that's the first thing I need to do." For the first time in years, I believed her. A few weeks later, my father sent a final letter. No long explanations this time. Just a single line. "I'm proud of you even if I never earned the right to say it." I framed that one. Not because it erased what he'd done, but because it reminded me that even flawed love can still evolve into something real. Life moved forward quietly after that. Evan and I bought a small house on the outskirts of town. Nothing grand. Just sunlight, bookshelves, and space to breathe. Sometimes we'd invite my mother for dinner. Sometimes Brianna would join us. And sometimes, when I least expected it, my father would call to ask about my garden. We didn't talk about the past anymore. We didn't need to. The silence between us had changed, no longer sharp, just soft. I realized then that reconciliation isn't a grand gesture. It's a slow rebuilding of trust in small, ordinary ways. One evening, while I was trimming flowers in the backyard, Jack stopped by. He looked around, smiling. "You've made this place beautiful." I laughed softly. "I guess I learned from you." He shook his head. "No, you learned from pain. That's a much harder teacher." I smiled. "Pain taught me how to grow. You taught me how to stay." He chuckled. "That's a fair trade." Then, more quietly, he said, "You know, that day walking you down the aisle, it healed something in me too. My daughter and I hadn't spoken in years. But after seeing you forgive your father, I called her. My eyes filled with tears. Did she answer?" He nodded. "She did. And we're working on it." I smiled through the ache in my chest. Then maybe that's the real purpose of all this. Healing doesn't just belong to one person. It echoes. Later that night, I stood by the window, watching the rain trace lines down the glass. For the first time in my life, I felt free. Not because everything was fixed, but because I had stopped trying to fix it. I had stopped defining myself by who showed up or who didn't, by who chose me or who never would. Because now, I finally understood that love isn't about who walks beside you when life is easy. It's about who stays when it's falling apart, even if that person is you. A month later, I received a small brown package. No return address. Just my name in my father's handwriting. Inside was a worn leather journal filled with dates, clippings, and small notes all about me. Articles about my career milestones. Photos from social media he must have saved. A ticket stub from my first public talk. And at the very end, one last line written in blue ink. Even when I wasn't there, I was still watching, wishing I'd been brave enough to show up. I cried for a long time that night. But they weren't the kind of tears that come from anger anymore. They were the kind that wash away the last traces of bitterness. The kind that mean you've finally let go. I didn't know it then. But that journal would become the bridge I never expected, not just to my father, but to the parts of myself I'd buried, trying to survive his absence. For years, I'd defined my worth by the moments he missed the recitals, the awards, the graduations. Now, reading his entries, I saw the invisible thread of love that had been there all along, clumsy, quiet, inconsistent, but real. Love doesn't always arrive on time. Sometimes it limps its way through regret, carrying every wrong turn it ever made, hoping you'll still open the door. And I did. One crisp autumn morning, I got a call from Brianna. "Adrian," she said softly. "Dad's in the hospital." The words hit me like a stone dropped in water, ripples of disbelief. Fear. Guilt. "What happened?" "Heart attack," she said, her voice trembling. "He's stable for now. But they're running more tests. Mom's with him." I closed my eyes, pressing a hand to my chest. For a moment, I felt like the child I used to be again, helpless. Small. Desperate for something to hold on to. "I'll be there," I whispered. When I arrived, the air smelled like antiseptic and hope that faint, fragile kind hospitals always seem to carry. My mother was sitting outside the room, her face pale and tired. "He's been asking for you," she said quietly. "He won't rest until he sees you." He hesitated. "Are you sure he wants to see me? Or just to ease his conscience?" She looked at me, tears in her eyes. "Adrian, he's not asking for forgiveness. He's asking for his daughter." When I walked into the room, my father was hooked up to machines that hummed softly, his chest rising and falling under thin hospital sheets. For the first time, I saw him not as the man who'd hurt me, but as someone fragile. Human. Breakable. He looked up when I entered, his eyes glassy. "Adrian." I forced a small smile. "Hey. Dad." He reached out his hand weakly. "You came." "Of course I did." He swallowed hard. "I thought maybe you wouldn't." I sat down beside him. "You taught me loyalty. Remember, I just learned to give it to the right people." He managed a weak laugh, the kind that cracked halfway through. "You got your strength from your mother." I shook my head. "No, Dad, I got it from surviving you." He winced, but then smiled faintly. "You always were honest." There was a long silence, the kind that fills with everything words can't say. Finally, he whispered, "Do you know what hurt the most? Watching you walk down that aisle in the photos Jack showed me, and realizing that I wasn't the one who deserved to be there." I felt a lump rise in my throat. "You could have been." "I know," he said softly, "but I thought I had time to make it right. And now, time's not something I can buy." I took his hand, old, worn, shaking, and for the first time in my life, I didn't feel anger. I felt something else. Compassion. Maybe. Sadness. He squeezed my fingers gently. "You forgave everyone but me, didn't you?" Tears filled my eyes. I thought forgiveness had to be earned. And now, I looked at him. Really looked at him. Now I think it just has to be real. He closed his eyes, a tear slipping down his cheek. "Then I can rest easy." He survived the heart attack. But it changed him. After he was discharged, he started volunteering at the local community center, teaching small business workshops to teenagers. He'd send me photos sometimes, him surrounded by kids with notebooks. His smile tired but genuine. Once, he wrote, "Helping them feels like rewriting my story one lesson at a time." And for the first time in my life, I saw my father not as a man who failed me, but as one who was trying, truly trying, to become better. One evening, months later, Brianna invited us all to dinner at her apartment. It was small, modest, nothing like the glamorous parties she used to throw. When I arrived, the table was set, simply pasta, wine, laughter, the kind of warmth that used to feel impossible in our family. At one point, she raised her glass. "To Adrian," she said, her voice steady, "for teaching me that love doesn't have to compete." I froze, surprised. My father smiled proudly, his eyes glistening. "She taught us all that. It wasn't the kind of forgiveness you announce. It was the kind you live." And in that moment, surrounded by the very people who once broke me, I realized that healing doesn't always come from distance. Sometimes it comes from watching the people who hurt you finally learn to love you the way they should have all along. Later that night, after everyone had left, I helped my father down the stairs. He moved slower now, but there was peace in his steps. When we reached his car, he stopped and turned to me. "Adrian, thank you for letting me still be your father." I smiled through tears. "Thank you for finally being one." He nodded, voice trembling. "I know I can't undo the past, but I can still be part of your future if you'll have me." I hugged him then, really hugged him. For the first time in decades, I didn't feel like I was holding on to a ghost. He whispered into my shoulder, "You're my greatest redemption." And I realized, maybe that was true for both of us. The following spring, I returned to the vineyard where I'd been married this time, not in white, but in soft blue, holding a single bouquet of lilies. Jack met me there. "You okay?" "Quito." I nodded, smiling. I just wanted to stand here again, not as the girl whose father didn't come, but as the woman who forgave him anyway. He chuckled. "That's one hell of a transformation." I looked out at the horizon, the light dancing over the vines. Forgiveness doesn't mean erasing what happened. It just means it can't control you anymore. He nodded. "And does it still hurt?" "Every day," I said, "but it hurts softer now." A week later, I got a small card in the mail from my father. Inside, in his familiar scrawl, he'd written, "If love is a lesson, then thank you for being my best teacher." At the bottom, he'd drawn a tiny heart, uneven, imperfect, but honest. I laughed, cried, and placed it in the same frame as his first letter. Because maybe that's what forgiveness really is, learning to keep the broken pieces without letting them cut you anymore. The next time Brianna called, she said something I'll never forget. "You know," she said, "for the first time, I don't want to be you. I just want to be your sister." And I smiled, because that was all I ever wanted too. That night, as I sat beside Evan on the porch, watching the sunset fade into gold, I realized something profound all my life. I thought my father's love was the prize I was chasing, but it wasn't. The real prize was the woman I became because of his absence, resilient, compassionate, unbreakable. And maybe that's how life works. Sometimes the people who fail you the hardest end up shaping you the strongest. Because pain doesn't just break you, it carves you into who you're meant to be. Time has a strange way of folding over itself. What once felt unbearable eventually becomes a story you can tell without shaking. It's been 3 years since that day, the day my father didn't walk me down the aisle. The day I finally stopped needing him to. I still remember every detail, the silence, the ache, the way my heart cracked in two. But now, when I think about it, there's no bitterness, just understanding. Because pain doesn't last forever, it transforms. When my father passed away a year later, I didn't expect the grief to hit me the way it did. I thought I'd already mourned him years before, when he chose absence over love. But standing at his funeral, listening to people describe the man he'd become, kind, humble, patient, I realized I'd lost him twice. Once as the father I needed, and once as the man he finally became. He'd left me a letter. It was short, only a few lines, written in his now familiar shaky hand. Adrian, if I could go back, I wouldn't change your wedding day because maybe that was the only way I'd finally see who I'd become. You were the mirror I was too afraid to look into. Thank you for holding it steady, even when it hurt. Love, Dad. I sat there in the empty church after everyone had gone, holding that letter in my lap, tears dripping onto the ink. Evan came up behind me, placing his hands gently on my shoulders. Are you okay? He whispered. I nodded. I think I am. Because somewhere between the heartbreak and the healing, I'd found peace not from forgetting, but from forgiving. Brianna sat beside me at the wake, quiet, her head resting on my shoulder. Do you think he knew we forgave him? She asked softly. I think he forgave himself first. I said, that's why he could finally be ours again. She smiled through tears. I'm trying, you know, to be better. I know. I said, you already are. And I meant it. Because the truth is, my sister and I were never enemies. We were just two daughters of a man who didn't know how to love both of us at once. But somehow, in the ruins of everything we lost, we found each other again. Months after the funeral, I visited the vineyard where everything began, where I'd once stood in a white dress, walking toward a future I couldn't yet see clearly. This time, I came alone. The vines had grown higher. The air smelled sweeter, and the wind carried that same soft music I remembered from my wedding night. I stood beneath the same arch where Jack had given me away and whispered into the wind. He came back. Jack. He really did. A butterfly landed on the bouquet I held, lilies, my father's favorite, and for a moment, I felt him there, not as the man who left, but as the man who finally stayed, and I smiled, because that was enough. Life is Keter now. Not empty, just peaceful. Evan and I started a small counseling program for daughters estranged from their parents. We called it the Second Chance Project. Every month, we host sessions where women share their stories, pain, betrayal, healing, and somewhere in those conversations, something magical happens. One woman, after years of silence, called her mother again. Another wrote a letter she never thought she'd be brave enough to send. Sometimes, they just sit and listen. Sometimes, that's all they need. Because forgiveness isn't always about reconciliation. Sometimes it's just about release. Brianna runs the community outreach branch now. Watching her help others calm, empathetic, grounded is surreal. One afternoon, as we were setting up for a group session, she turned to me and said, You know, I used to envy you for being strong, but now I realize strength doesn't mean not breaking. It means breaking and still choosing love after. I smiled. Then we're both strong. She laughed softly. Guess Dad raised us better than we thought. And for the first time, I agreed. Because sometimes, the legacy a parent leaves behind isn't perfection. It's the courage to do better than they did. Years later, on our anniversary, Evan and I returned to the church where we were married. The same oak tree stood outside. A branche heavier now. Older. Wiser. I stood beneath it, tracing the initials Evan had carved that night after we said our vows A+E. Always choosing. And I realized how true that was. Love isn't something that happens once. It's something you keep choosing. Even when the world gives you reasons not to. Especially when it does. After the ceremony, a young woman approached me. She was trembling, holding a small notebook. Are you Adrian Williams? She asked. I smiled. Yes. She hesitated, then said, "I saw your interview, the one about forgiveness and family. I just wanted to say, it saved me." My throat tightened. "Thank you," I whispered. She smiled through tears. "My father left when I was little. I've hated him for years. But last night, I wrote him a letter. I don't know if I'll ever send it, but I feel lighter." I reached for her hand. "Then, that's enough. Healing doesn't start when they come back. It starts when you stop waiting for them to." She nodded, crying, and hugged me, and I knew every wound I'd carried. Every tear I'd ever shed had led me here. To this, to helping someone else find the peace I fought so hard to earn. That night, back home, I stood at the window and whispered into the quiet, "I forgive you, Dad." It wasn't dramatic. There was no music. No cinematic glow. Just a soft certainty in my chest, like the calm that follows a storm you thought would never end. Because that's what forgiveness really is. Not a grand gesture. Not a single moment. But a series of small choices to let go. To love anyway. To move forward without carrying the past on your back. I thought of the little girl I used to be waiting by the window, hoping her father would show up. I wanted to tell her, "He will. Someday. But not in the way you think. He'll show up in the way you learn to love without fear. In the strength you find when you stop needing approval. In the peace that blooms when you choose to stay soft. Even after everything."